You're listening to This Side of the Ceiling. Join us as we open up the Bible and invite the Holy Spirit to teach us. I'm Jill.
And I'm Kelsey. As Christians, we've been told that in this world we will have trouble. But we take heart that God has given us everything we need for life and godliness on this side of the ceiling. Welcome back to This Side of the Ceiling. And last week we kind of introduced the study that we're in now. We are studying the book of James.
Yes, the brother of Jesus.
Yeah.
And who better? Probably one of the people on earth that was with him the most, that clocked the most time getting to watch him, because he had all those first 30 years that he knew Jesus before he kind of comes on the scene.
Right, yeah. So it's his brother that we're talking about, and he introduces himself in James 1 as a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we talked about how that was significant because in the earlier years, he probably would not have said he was a servant of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, we get to see James go from being a skeptic.
Right.
To being a believer.
Yeah, to being a servant that he calls himself. But I'm going to jump right in. We're going to study today James 1, 2 through 18. And so I'm just going to read that passage and then we'll pull out some interesting facts about it. So it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, 'God is tempting me,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created." So, James wrote this book soon after Jesus' resurrection, we think, and we think it may have been the first book written in the New Testament for the Christians, the new Christians that were living in Jerusalem. And it's interesting that the first thing that he tells Christians is, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds.
Right.
The opening line.
Yeah. We're talking about how this book of James, we want to grow in faith in the same way that James did. How he was a skeptic and became a servant. We want to grow that way too. And right off the bat, he says, well, then you're going to have to persevere, because you're going to have trials. And we know that, but sometimes we're still surprised when it happens. We think if we do things God's way that we'll avoid that. But the Bible never says that.
No. And then, what was happening in the early church in Acts 12, it says, it was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. So this is the brand new church, and Herod's going to persecute them. It goes on to say he had James, the brother of John, not this James, James and John, brothers of Zebedee, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. So this is what's happening to them. They are being persecuted. And so James' first words are, consider it joy when you face trials.
Right. And, you read too that there's a difference between temptations that lead to sin and testing. And this specifically says, count it joy, the testing of your faith, because it produces something in you that you want, that's good for you. You said perseverance. My Bible said steadfastness. I think other versions say patience and endurance. And so, it's hard to be thankful for a trial, though, or to count it joy.
Yeah.
But I do think after you've lived a while, you can look back and say, I am thankful for that trial. It did produce in me some good things. I think back to a trial I had right after high school. I was praying. I was probably in a really high spiritual place. I feel like for the first time, my faith was really my own, and I was growing and studying. And for the first time, I was looking at the summer thinking, what can I do for you, Lord, instead of when can I go to the lake, And so I thought, I'll go serve at camp and I will pour myself out for these girls. And I got told no. And it was someone I knew, and he said, well, we don't want to hire high school kids. Come back next year. I'll hire you as a college student when you have some experience. Well, that was fine until I found out a couple weeks later that some boys in my age group had been hired. And I went back and said, well, wait a minute, I thought you needed to have college experience. And at the time he said, well, I need them to lead devotionals and I need them. And I was very tempted to become bitter and play the victim. And I am so thankful now for that trial. Number one, I persevered and did not become bitter, and I did go back to that camp the next summer and the next summer and and it blessed me, and it's continued to bless my life. And I think if I have given in to that bitterness, and then I wouldn't have had that experience with the camp. And as I look back on it now, it was a trial. It forced me to go get a real job. It was the first time where I needed to get a job. And so as it turned out, I was led to a godly man who became a mentor, and that was a job that taught me things, and I was able to work in to help provide money all through college. Not only that, but my future husband was at the camp that summer, and I look back and I'm glad I didn't meet him as a high school girl. I wasn't ready to meet him yet.
Right.
And he was there that summer, and so we met the next summer, and and I look back on what was a trial at the time, and I'm very grateful for it. And of course, James doesn't say look back on it. He says have the maturity to see that it's going to produce something good in you. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons that I hold on to for following Jesus, is that he promises that he will use our trials for our good. I mean, everybody has trials. That's not just Christians. Everybody has had trials that they go through, but God says, I'm going to give you something out of that trials. And he's not afraid of how we hurt in our trials. I mean, my goodness, there's a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations. That's just full of, I'm in a trial and it stinks. In fact, I want to read some from Lamentations. It's probably the one thing that people know of if they've read Lamentations, but I'm going to back up and just read a little bit, because this is real. This is authentic. And this person is like, you're not listening to me. I'm in this. And I just think that God chose to put that in the Bible. He says, no, I'm not afraid of how you feel in these trials. But I'm just going to read a little bit in Lamentations. It says, I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of his wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me he turns his hand again and again all day long. He's made my flesh and my skin waste away. He has broken my bones. He has besieged and enveloped me with bitterness and tribulation. He has made me dwell in darkness like the dead of long ago. He's walled me about so that I can't escape. He's made my chains heavy. Though I call and cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with blocks of stones and made my paths crooked. And it goes on and on. And this is in the Bible. And so I'm gonna go down and it says verse 20, my soul continually remembers it, and I am bowed down within me. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. I think that's an interesting verse. I'm going to stop there because it says it's good that you bear this yoke in your youth. And you would think, why? Why is it good? The only reason I can think of that it would be good is because you have something to gain that will be a blessing to you your whole life. And so if you learn some of these lessons in your youth, then you get to live with the product of that blessing longer. And I don't have the answers to all this, when you feel like God's not hearing your prayers. I mean, I read enough in the Bible to believe he is.
Right.
But I do believe it's very real when you feel that your prayers aren't getting past the ceiling, that there's nothing there. But one verse that has been comforting to me is also in this Lamentations chapter 3, verse 31. It says, "For the Lord will not cast off forever, but though he cause grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve children of men." And I have often thought of that. We know that if God is all powerful, which we believe he is, then all the things that happen to us, these trials, he could stop them. Mm-hmm. He could allow us to escape that. And when I don't understand why did this have to happen? You could have stopped it. This is the verse I go to that says he doesn't willingly afflict or grieve the children of men. Right. So there has to be some reason, because he's not doing this willingly. He doesn't want to. Mm-hmm. So I think that is something to remember as we're thinking about this faith that perseveres.
Right.
Because there are actually a lot of people in the Bible that you can hardly find anybody that didn't go through some kind of testing. I mean, think of Abraham and Isaac,
right.
or Joseph. Really, it's hard not to think of anybody. I mean, we talked about David last year, and you think about all those times he ran from Saul that he probably thought, "What am I doing?" You know, and God was teaching him to trust him and persevere.
Yeah.
The next part does give a little hope, though. I think in verse 5 where James says, "If you lack wisdom, just ask God. He gives generously to those who ask." So we can gain wisdom through going through a deep trial, but we can also ask for it. I think there's two ways that you're going to get wise. One is God says some things you're going to have to learn testing, but you can also ask me and I'll just give it to you. Mm-hmm. And that's a beautiful thought as well.
Right.
But after that, it goes back down again and talks some more about this trial. Verse 12, again, it goes back to, "Blessed is the person who remains steadfast, who perseveres. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life." And then it talks about temptation. Yeah. You were thinking a lot about that, weren't you?
Yeah, it's interesting to me. He kind of jumps around a lot in this first chapter, just lots of different thoughts. Let me give you some thoughts.
Yeah, and I think he's going to come back to, it's kind of almost saying, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to talk about this. Mm-hmm. And I think he's going to come back and visit some of those later.
Yeah, but this part where it says, "When tempted, no one should say, 'God is tempting me,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death." I think James here gives us some strategies. I don't think temptation is sin.
No.
For sure. And he's telling us you're going to be tempted, especially in trials or situations where it's hard. And so I think he's giving kind of a strategy to stop it. There are different points where you can stop the temptation or just leave the temptation
before it gives
altogether.
birth.
Right, yeah.
You've got 9 months till something gives birth in a human, so there is time.
Yeah, and there's a passage in Matthew where Jesus is talking to his disciples in the garden during his trial, and he tells them, this is in the Message, but in Matthew 20 it says, stay alert, be in prayer so you don't wander into temptation without even knowing you're in danger. There is a part of you that is eager, ready for anything in God, but there's another part that's as lazy as an old dog sleeping by the fire. Mm-hmm. And so even Jesus, says, stay alert. We've got an enemy that is coming after you. But then he says, you're dragged away by your own evil desire and enticed. And then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. It's interesting that he's using the word birth there, because birth usually gives us life.
Right.
But he's talking about, the birth that is to sin. And then sin grows. And that gives birth to death.
Which is such like sin. I mean, we think it's going to... It promises so much, and really what it gives birth to is death. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't even know it. But I think one of the strategies he's giving here, first of all, is eliminate the moment. The minute that you're dragged away and enticed. Get out of that moment. And see that moment coming. That's probably not the first time that has enticed you. And then also he says to look where it's leading. It's leading toward death. And so kind of play it out in your mind where it's going to lead, those different temptations. But then verse 16 goes on to say, don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. So, really look up. Mm-hmm. Don't be deceived. Be on your guard, be alert, and look up toward him, because he's the one that's going to give good gifts.
Yeah, every good gift.
Yeah.
Everything. Don't think you did anything about that.
Right.
I think that's such a great word. Every good gift is from above. So, I mean, we should make the practice of, before our heads hit the pillow, of thinking, what was good things that happened in my day today, and recognize that was a gift from God. And thanking him for that, and don't be deceived into thinking that we had anything to do with that.
Yeah. And then, of course, he goes that he chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. There he uses that word birth again.
Yes.
But it's on good, birth into good.
Yeah, and I really like how you're talking about death and life. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think we can make the Bible very hard, and sometimes it seems very simple. Mm-hmm. You have a choice between life and death.
Right.
And it even kind of lines up here. God is offering you life. Satan is offering you death.
Right.
And God is going to test you so that you can persevere and mature and have this life. And Satan is going to tempt you to try to create these desires that would lure you away into a sin that gives birth to death. Mm-hmm. And testing is not bad. Temptation's not bad. My dad used to say, temptation is like a bird flying over your head. You can't keep a bird from flying over your head, but you can keep it from building a nest there. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop that process. Mm-hmm. There's usually a process, so stop it before it happens. It reminds me of another time in the Bible, in Deuteronomy 30, where Moses is standing before the people, and it's getting close to the end of his life, and he wants to give them kind of some parting words. And he looks out over these people, these Israelites, and in Deuteronomy 30:19, he says the following: I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life.
Yeah.
And I think that is what we want to do as long as we're on this side of the ceiling.
Thanks for listening and journeying with us on this side of the ceiling. See you next time.